Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Oraculos True Divination podcast, where I bring you ancient wisdom for the modern mystic. I'm your host, Mychal A. Bryan, and joining me today is the entire team. So many astrologers who I appreciate and whose work I respect and love from the Black Astrological community. And I just wanted to say thank you all for being here right now. I'm not sure whether or not you're seeing the screen the same way I'm seeing it. So I want you to go around and introduce yourselves, but I know that probably you're seeing yourself someplace else and I'm seeing you. So I will just go around and introduce everyone. We have Samuel Reynolds here, Sam. We have Shakira Taborn here with us as well. We also have Mr. Demetrius Bagley, who is and has been instrumental in making this entire conversation happen today. So Demetrius, welcome and thank you for being here.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having us all here this evening.
Most definitely. We have Miss Mecca Woods in the house as well. Mecca, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We have Tracey Rogers. Hey, Tracey.
Hey, how are you?
All is well. I'm super happy to be here with you. And last but definitely not least, we have Miss Ashleigh DJ. Ashleigh, thank you so much for being in the house as well.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So for those listeners and viewers out there, if this is your first time tuning into the Oraculos True Divination podcast, this is a podcast where I bring you interviews from astrologers from around the world who aren't just changing their own lives through their astrology, but they're also changing the shape of the world around them by virtue of their astrological practice. So if you're interested in being a part of the magic and the momentum that we're building here on the True Divination podcast, please take a moment, go down below. Please do like the video, but also hit subscribe so that you can continue to receive these wonderful interviews from these wonderful astrologers. All right, so this entire year has been quite the experience for all of us globally. From the new year rolled in and everything that brought, we've experienced such a state of upheaval and deep transformation within the world at large. But the last few weeks, and I dare say the last month moving into this month, we as the Black community have also been going through the ringer. And I wanted for us to come together today to talk about what that represents and how that has impacted us, and just take a second to check in and see, how is everyone?
I can respond. First of all, thank you for that question, because it's a loaded one. I feel like when folks ask me personally, how are you doing in this landscape, it's the question is, for lack of a better word, pretty laughable. Personally, I feel like I am coming out the other side of a flurry of emotions and ideas and anger and apathy to some extent, just kind of recognizing that this has always been and it will always be, and feeling helpless there. And at the same time, I've been able to cling to my community and find support, especially being here in this space. Just being asked that question has been helpful, but definitely coming out the other side of a roller coaster of feelings and sentiments.
Yeah,
I was going to say that I definitely agree with Tracey. I think asking the question, "How are you doing?" has been becoming like, it's hard to answer. Like, and then I think that was like why everybody sort of froze when you first answered the question, because it's like, how do you respond to it in an authentic way, instead of just saying, "Oh, fine, everything's fine," because everything is not fine, and so yeah, I find myself having like a range of like emotions from day to day, hour to hour. Definitely in a moodier space than I'm normally am. I'm an Aquarius moon, so I'm not used to being as moody as like, and dealing with like all of these emotions and all of these things. I've been finding it very interesting to have to hold space for other people and hold space for myself. But at the same time, I don't know if this has been anyone else's experience, but I know on a personal level, it's also shown me like where I need to be better at asking for help and like receiving help and support from folks, because I'm traditionally a person, I have a lot of Saturn in my chart, Saturn in the first, moon in Aquarius. I don't ask for help as much as I often should. And so definitely being in this quarantine, dealing with stuff on a personal and also dealing, things on a business end, it definitely has like shown me where I do need like more community. So in regards, like, so in some way it's been helpful, like where we've been, like it's been awful for sure, but it has been helpful in showing me like how necessary, like how integral we are to each other, and like having these spaces are so important.
That's been my experience as well. Like the major theme of all of this seems to be this like Saturn and Aquarius, like community is everything, or at least is essential, just as essential as anything else. And I'm in the middle of my Saturn return right now in Aquarius.
Me too.
Yes. So you feel it. And yeah, I've been learning so much about Saturn and that placement. And for me, it also rules my 11th house of community, which is my North Node is there. And it's just really showing me, I think throughout all of this, it's showing me how strong of a community I do have. And it's really showing me what like having such a dignified Saturn is all about. And I've been feeling really blessed of, like around how I've been able to lean on community. And yeah, I feel like I started talking to this like one group of astrologers basically every single day since around quarantine started. And just that alone, like constantly talking to astrologers. There's a couple group of astrologers really I'm in like constant conversation with, and that alone is very like 11th house Saturn community vibe. And so yeah, I think that's been huge, and just kind of showing us that everyone has a role and you have to find your people and you have to be able to rely on them and be there for them when they need you to. And that's kind of, I think, how we're going to get through a lot of this.
I'll go. Yeah, I mean, for me, what's fascinating, I mean, you're asking pretty much about the last few weeks or this whole moment, this whole quarantine moment, or just both?
And, as everyone started to talk, I realized that we have two very critical things going on right now. And I do think that we need to create space to talk about COVID, but definitely we need to have a conversation about what's going on in terms of racism in America. So yes, talk about both.
Okay. So I've never been busier than I have been in my career, like in the last 3 months, which has brought up a lot of issues for me. Like on some level, happy for the business, but then like the whole skew in terms of my work-life balance literally has gone out the window. Like I don't have a work-life balance anymore. And I'm not blaming anyone else except me, right? But it's been interesting to see how that has ballooned by just having nowhere else to go, right? Because I can't go to the gym, I can't so I also didn't venture out as much. So that has been its own moment for me of, dealing with both the intimacy related to work, but also the intimacy related to, relationships and how that has changed my relationships. When I say change my relationships, in some ways that I wouldn't have been able to predict, a year ago or so. So for instance, I'm connecting again with my frat brothers. I bought paraphernalia. I haven't bought any paraphernalia for my frat in 20 years. And maybe like and you're 2 lifetimes actually, right? It's like I haven't done that, you know, just because it hasn't been a priority. So that's been really interesting. Bonding with family a little more, which has been, you know, like just talking, you know, and seeing how we're doing. I mean, like, it's different, you know, you check on each other maybe every, you know, depending on your family, right? You know, every week or whatever, or every other week, but it's been a different quality of connection that I'm appreciating. An interesting thing for me, the irony, you know, Shakira just talked a bit about the 11th house. I mean, I'm in a 5th house perfection year. And so I'm like, where's the 5th house here? I mean, like, you know, I thought I was going to be on a cruise and traveling. So I've had to learn how to make my own fun, you know? So I bought a musical instrument for the first time in a while. And just, it's been an interesting thing to kind of connect to the sense of pleasure in a different way. In relation to the last few weeks, what's been most compelling, I'm just going to talk since we're among each other. I mean, like,
Please.
and then even though other people are going to see it, what was most stressful was the white people coming out of the woodwork to kind of say, like, how are you? Right? I'm like, that was the thing that really kind of stressed me out the most. And I just had to kind of, like, one of my dear friends, you know, reached out to me, and I ended up like writing, like, and I'd never do like mad texts, you know. Yeah. I ended up like at 1 o'clock in the morning, like writing her a letter, essentially, you know, long letter, basically saying, like, you know, you asking me this is kind of like, it's, and I don't know if I used the word annoying or not, but it was more or less like, well, this is my regular. I'm glad this is like, and so you kind of asking me to break out of my defense mechanisms just to break down for you, like, how I'm feeling is so anomalous. I don't even know where to begin. So this is kind of your particular moment. And I'm happy for this moment because we want to see this happening, this change in America. So I'm not trying to blow you off, but at the same time, I can't be there, as Mecca said, to hold so much space for you too. That's not what I can do. So I think that was one particular thing. And just to kind of wrap it up in terms of how else I'm feeling both sad and vindicated. And when I say I feel sad that this is happening, that it has to happen. Maybe that's more like it. The vindication is, as Mecca and Kirah, Ashleigh can attest, and definitely Demetrius, I've been talking about this for 10 years. You know, I every now and again, I would tweet, the police are not your friends, right? And kind of people would get like, you know, some people would get it, some people don't. But I think more people are getting like, we're dealing with a structural issue that is something that has to be remedied at a very, very deep level. So that's how I'm doing.
Thanks for sharing that, Sam. And now I just want to break rank for a second and ask everyone, how many amongst us have had to do what Sam did in terms of writing paragraphs to explain to people why what's happening right now is happening right now, and also to really put some people in their place and be like, hey, this thing that you just shared makes no sense whatsoever. This thing that you just reposted completely is not appropriate. Like, has anyone else had that experience during the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've, on my own Facebook timeline, I had like a Karen moment, a Karen event, you know, like I had, you know, it was amazing to me because it was with one white friend who I've known for a long time, met at least once, who decided to fight nearly everyone on my timeline. And I was just like, wow. Like, and then like, you know, people are attacking me. I'm like, no, chick, you mean like you actually are staying for the battle. So it was really fascinating. And when I say, I mean, she battled for hours and at least 100 people, I would imagine, you know, like in terms of how she would go back and forth with people. And I was like, I don't know if I were white, if I would be investing as much energy as you're doing.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's my experience.
Yeah, I feel like I have had a lot of people reach out to me. I just haven't had the energy to actually like give much of a response besides like, I'm okay. Like, because in my mind, like, I mean, I'm not going to explain anything to anyone or like take time out of my day to spell things out for the most part, because I just don't have the patience. But and also I'm not really great with like comebacks. That's not like my thing. I'm not really good at like expressing, especially when it's emotionally charged. I'm not the best at like being like, this is why I feel this way, and like breaking it down in a way that would be meaningful. I'm just like, I'm angry, this is annoying. But yeah, I think one thing I've noticed, I have this Mars Neptune thing in my first house is squaring my Mercury in my midheaven. And I have had moments, and then also that eclipse June 5th was wild and super angular for me. And I did have to call out someone who like tried to fight me like 10 years ago and called me the N-word. And so I called her out on social media, and that was a lot. And these like Mars eclipsey actions, like I've been like calling out brands a lot on Instagram. I never do that. But I've been like commenting on brands Instagrams and like taking action in these like really weird specific ways. But yeah, to answer that question, I think I've had the opportunity to have to, talk to white people like that for the most part. I actually just had a friend like 2 hours ago text me about this, and he's like, I've heard this. Is this really how you feel? Like, because I would like to know, and like I've definitely reached out to Black friends, and like I want to know if like, because he saw it like in a New Yorker cartoon or something, and he wanted to know my opinion. And I was like, yeah, actually, it's really annoying, and I've talked to a lot of Black people who feel the same way. And he was receptive to that and like thanked me for, laying it down like that, I guess. But yeah.
Well, since we're talking about charts, I have Mercury in Aries in the 4th house, and I have Moon in Gemini sextiling that Mercury, and I have that Mercury trining my Sagittarius ascendant. So I have been on the battlefield, and I have been writing some epistles all across social media, because I have been shocked at some of the commentary from people who you would expect to be woke, especially people within the astrological community. I had to delete a couple astrologers from Facebook. I had to delete a couple astrologers from Facebook because there was this one guy who, commenting on the incident with our brother George Floyd, he said, well, if his parents hadn't told him that it was inappropriate to give counterfeit money to a store, and if his parents hadn't taught him that maybe it might be potentially dangerous and deadly to try to like steal from someone and take drugs at the same time, then they failed him. An astrologer. And then this other astrologer said that, it's ironic that if Black people had not been brought to America because of slavery, and if slavery did not happen, then the world would be more racist than it is today. Those are comments from astrologers. I went to town.
Well, I'm glad that you went to town on something like that, because that needs to be called out. I mean, yeah, I stay off of Facebook and I stay ignoring astrologer friend requests on Facebook for the most part, because I don't want to see, because I just know that the wider community, especially, not all of the older astrologers, but tend to be the Pluto and Virgos and older. And of course, it's not just them, but in terms of Facebook population, that's all I'm saying. It tends to be like that. I mean, we had one of our astrological greats, and I won't name him, but he on Facebook made a comment about how ageism is worse than racism. Those were his words. And it's like, okay, cool, good to know. good to know that's
Wow.
what you're thinking. So
I want to jump in here. You've asked some great questions, Mychal, and riff off of things as a Gen Xer. I'm good.
I.e. Pluto and Virgo.
I want to go back to your first question, Mychal, for this conversation. One, I'm good, all capital letters. And I'm also fired up because I'm a little bit more worried about my mortality, which was already a personal story on my chart in 2019. So what I'm trying to do, which is interesting to hear about the 11th and 5th house, respectively, for Kirah, from you and from Sam, I'm not in any of those stories right now, is what else can I do today? What can I do this week? That was already a story before this pandemic and the shutdown for me. And that has gotten cranked up in ways where I'm like, well, wait a minute, hang on. I need to go eat and make some food and breathe and just do these sort of basic mundane things. So I've had to rein myself in some similar ways, I think, to what I heard you say, Sam. But I'm good also because I saw some of the cartoons and the warnings from other Black folks that, you're going to start getting the text and the messages, etc. So I'm not writing the paragraphs, not for that. I'm writing the paragraphs so I can get us in this conversation that we're having right now, right? That's part of what I bring as Gen X. So I can make moves and maneuvers through the shit that has been here for decades or centuries, because my 2019 was so terrible. How terrible is it right in the background? It can only be, and I recognize 2020 is a lot, it's shitty, it's in the crapper, and however you want to fill in that blank. But I knew coming in as an astrologer that 2020 would definitely be my year over 2019. Anything would be, because that was the lowest, not the worst, but the lowest year I have lived thus far, and hopefully ever will be. And that's a whole conversation that I'm not necessarily ready to record yet. And I also knew, because 2020 has a slew, we could be here for 4, 5, 6, days, really, not even just hours, unpacking the astrology that we've reached, This conversation is June 14th. We're not even halfway through this yet. And after we get through, knock on wood that we get through it, the 366 days, it's a leap year, don't forget, Here's an extra one for you. We have to go into 2021. Don't even think about that astrology yet. We need to really work through, not just astrologers, not just Black astrologers, what 2020 it is and is not. And part of what it is all of this shit is on the table now. So you have white people all across the globe, all 50 states, in the streets with the mask on, with the anger and. We have not seen this before. Did I expect it? Yes. Did I expect it in spring of 2020 as a Black astrologer, as an astrologer? No. I thought it was coming, and not even all the protests. In July, with the cardinality, Mars in Aries, and that story there, and looking back at cycles, and Saturn going backwards, so to speak, back into Capricorn, also cardinal, and going across the USA's Pluto 2 more times, Whole nother conversation. So did I know it was coming? More or less, yes, And we also know, let's step aside from the astrology a second. We knew when this man ran for president 4 years ago, he was stirring the bottom of the pot, And not just astrologers, not just Black astrologers, not just Black Americans. The world knew it and warned us. Hillary warned us. So none of this is surprising if you were reading along with what's happening. Now what's amazing in this moment, and yes, I am upset, but I'm also excited. We can change some of this shit, hello Pluto, up. But we also have to manage, as 3 or 4 of you have said on this conversation already, our energies. This shit is heavy. This is exhausting. This ain't new for Black people. It is so not new. But the moment or the year is new. And we can make some different choices. Even a little bit, God help us, God us help us. Let's make a different choice. And people in the street say, oh no, we're not here for this. So let's see what it is or is not. But am I good? Yeah. I'm not out here to be bad for these folks. I'm not here to give them the paragraphs that they may or may not want. Y'all go deal with the anti-racism. I'm just trying to stay alive. No difference there than it was 4 months ago, 4 years ago, 4 decades, whatever, and steer through some of this, I don't know, new song, new remix you have, right? And that's why I'm excited about astrologers in general, keeping in mind what you said, Kirah, because I know the name. I could call the name, but what does that do? I need to do my work, not your work. I had to correct a young white astrologer the other day. Oh yes, I need to get Black astrologers on there. No, boo. You need to work on anti-racism with the white astrologers. This is not our construct and never has been. And if you want to get the 411 on that, you check out Brother Sam talking to white astrologer Chris Brennan on his recent podcast episode. We want to do and speak about what we want to speak about, not your shit that has been up on the table for a while. Let me pause there because for sure I could go on, but not the only person in this conversation.
All right. All right. Thank you, Reverend. Man, you delivered the Sunday sermon.
Oh, boy.
I want to hear from Ashleigh.
So, I guess to start off, I'm a lot of things. It's interesting because for as much Aquarius as I have in my chart now with Saturn Aquarius, it's for a long time I felt so like chaotic and unstable and just off, and Saturn had been sitting in my 12th for the longest and just really tearing me up. And everything that's happened over the last few months has really put so much into perspective and really externalized a lot of chaos that I had been experiencing. And it helped put a lot into perspective for me. And it's really made me think of, like, I'd always felt like I'd get to this place with my astrology, but it's accelerated it as far as really niching me down and making me focus and start to intentionally build, I guess, my community or whatever. Because for a long time, I started doing astrology and it was kind of reactive. A lot of people think like I had this grand plan and, you know, it just seems like you or whatever, but no, girl, that was not what was happening. Mm-hmm. But now that I'm 5 years in, which is such a blessing to say, now I'm at a point where, and I think the world is at a point where they're willing to try something new. And so am I. And it's just, I don't know. I've been really digging into what is it going to take for us to think differently, and not even so much as differently, but just what's the process going to be for us to make these new structures? Like it has to start here. It has to, we really got to get on some one band, one sound shit. And like, and it's like, okay, you play this part, you play that part, you get the trumpet, you hit this note. Like everybody has got to get on their beat and we got to get out here and do this like together. And I've just been feeling so like Demetrius just energized, ready to go, and frankly angry, but it's a different kind of anger. I've been definitely digging into my Aquarian anger, and it's an interesting place, and but I'm learning to utilize that power and not let, you know, oh, angry Black woman, whatever. You know what? You damn right I'm angry.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to show you what the hell I could do with this anger. And it's going to be like nothing you ever seen before. Nothing you or I ever seen before. Because I ain't never about to wild out like I'm about to wild out on y'all. So, you know, it's going to be a learning experience for everybody. And so I'm just looking forward to us as a people learning how to wild out the way we need to. Because it's funny because this is only just the first taste of Saturn and Aquarius. See, Lord, this ain't my eye twitch. That's the thing about it. Like, this is just the beginning. So if the girls are acting like this right now, can you imagine what we're going to be doing once Saturn is squarely into Aquarius? So I think all of us are at a point where it's like we're fed up and we have nothing left to lose. So it's like, well, what do you all want to do? Like, I have Mars and Sag, so I'm at a point where it's like I'm ready to admit I like to fight. So what's up? Like, just because that's what the world is saying to us. It's like you all like to steal, you like to fight, you like to be violent, you like to lie. Like, these are things that you like to do. So like, let's just put it all out on the table and let's get with it. You want to get crazy? I can get insane. Like, let's do it. Because I mean, I don't know. That's just me, but you know, I'm here ready for whatever, and I'm glad that we're all coming together and having these conversations because it's necessary. We need to have this exchange of ideas, and we need to have these real world connections. So, yeah.
You know, what I think is really a big piece insofar as the Black experience is concerned, and particularly the Black spiritual experience, if we consider our love of astrology being a love of something intrinsically spiritual, I think that we as Black people go through these waves of numbness and deep, intense pain over and over again. And because at a level, we do have to numb ourselves in order to function. We do have to numb ourselves in order to have conversations with our white colleagues and pretend as if the person who we just saw kill Ahmaud Arbery doesn't look like this other colleague who we communicate with on a daily basis. Like, we have this thing where we have to still be able to function in this world, even though a lot of our colleagues and friends look like the people who are essentially killing Black people. And I think with this whole situation with George Floyd, it really stripped off that numbness band-aid that we usually can slap right back on. Because when we saw that officer kneeling on George Floyd's neck, it completely changed everything to see that Black brother on the floor go from being alive, begging for his breath, to then fade away as we watched it. So it stripped off this numbness that is inherent within our Blackness, because we learn this numbness from our homes. We learn this numbness from our families. And especially for me, I mean, I'm not from America. I don't know what the American experience is like. But in the Caribbean, where we have this deep history of colonialism, we know how to act proper and speak the Queen's English when we see a white person walk past, because it is such a rarity in the Caribbean to have another white child in your predominantly Black classroom. It's such a rarity to buck into a white person in the grocery store that we have this thing of putting on something that probably isn't even authentic. But I wonder, for you all as Black astrologers living in America, how have you navigated this numbing of things that should essentially make us non-functional, as well as this part of really sitting in this pain and realizing that this pain is here for a reason and this pain calls us to action?
Well, I can only speak to my experience. I was raised by parents who were very revolutionary and very, like, you know, Black power, and very like, you're going to know where you come from and be proud of that. And so for me, in terms of my work, like, I don't know if I will call it numb per se. maybe functional is the word, like being functional, you know, in the society. But ever since I've become an astrologer, which is about almost like a decade ago, I've always strived to like infuse my blackness in terms of what I do, you know, and be very like unapologetic about it. Even down to like not only just like with like, you know, clients or like my horoscopes or the things that I'm writing. I have a podcast, you know, with Janelle Belgrave, who Demetrius produces, where we talk about this stuff all the time. So like even going back to like when you were talking about like how if you had to call anybody out, we call people out on that podcast all the time. And people love it, you know, the things that we talk about on there. Politics, we have, you know, we've had Sam on the show before, we've had Ashleigh on the show before. You know, things that we've talked about always have to do with like the politics, you know, the things that are going on in the world and how it relates to astrology. And we often do it from a lens of like what it means to be Black in America. And so you know, it's funny that, you know, I've been also thinking about that in context to like the different opportunities that I've been offered this year. You know, I've been finding myself saying no to a lot of things. And I mean, I've always been someone who's been aware of like what my values are and making sure the things that I say yes to align with that. But I feel like even with this Venus, because I'm, you know, I'm a Sag sun, Venus and Sag, so I'm getting this opposition and the squares, you know, very angular stuff that is happening right now for me. And I've been finding myself really having to really stick to like my bottom and core values of things that I'm willing to do and not do, just for the sake of like, this is not in alignment with, you know, with who I am and what it is that I want to represent. So like, for example, like I've had like fashion companies like reaching out to me about things, and it just feeling like this is not really on brand, you know, for what it is that I'm trying to do. Like I just felt, and that's not to say that like people, like Black folks within the fashion industry aren't making like their own waves there or making their own changes, and that they're actually doing, you know, structural, you know, there's structural changes there that need to be made. But I just felt like for me, like in terms of like what it is that I'm trying to accomplish with my work, like I just feel like the Blackness, I don't know, it was kind of like read the room. I guess that was like having like a read the room moment with myself, and it just kind of being like, this is not business as usual, you know, and kind of like having conversations with people who are like the marketers and like, you know, the PR people. And actually like this wasn't something that I would normally do, and I would say that this is what I've been noticing the change, but I've actually been telling people I don't have it. I'm tired. You know, like I don't have the energy to give to these things that are kind of like not really on my radar right now. And what I've been noticing is that when I have been saying that and telling people like I don't have it in me, you know, people are like, oh yeah, you know, I understand, you know, that makes a lot of sense, because it's also to me a kind of thing like something to like, you know, what what Sam and everyone has been saying is kind of like, you know, you guys need to do the work. You know, like that's not up to me, and I'm not, and that's also kind of thing because I have that moon in the 7th house, so it's like I don't want to do emotional labor for people anymore. Yeah. You know, and I don't want to wear the mask anymore of making it seem like everything's okay when it's not. Yeah. So that's kind of like where I've been.
Yeah, I feel that a lot. Especially, I don't know. I grew up with like mostly white kids. Like I went to a small all girls private school, just like rich white kids. It was a lot. But just in terms of having to numb yourself, like, and also having to make yourself small a lot of the times too, and just to like get by, just to fit in, for most of my life, I would say. And I feel like these eclipses happening, like this one was on top of my Mercury in midheaven, and I feel like it's finally giving me the opportunity to just be like, nah, I can't do it anymore. And also, again, just talking about where we're putting our energy and being a lot more deliberate and intentional about that. Because yeah, I think that I'm a huge proponent of like resting for resistance and like care as resistance, and making sure that we're really truly taking care of ourselves, because I don't think that a lot of our ancestors were given that possibility and we're given those options, especially in terms of taking care of our bodies. Like, I think that needs to be prioritized, and we shouldn't have to, like, it's time for us to get out of struggle, like in so many different aspects of that. And I think especially in terms of health, that's important for me, at least, through all of this.
Mychal, I want to thank you, first of all, for having the diasporan conversation that we don't have often enough without vitriol, without kind of getting into like, you know, we this kind of Black folk or this kind of Black folk, rather than just acknowledging that we are Black folk.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to recognize our differences, but also just to talk about where we are aligned. For me, I believe now, you know, not too far from my second Saturn return, I got maybe another 6-7 years, but I feel it. I realized I have been cultivating a particular worldview similar to what Mecca was talking about for most of my adult life. And I can say it succinctly as this. One, and I've said this on Twitter, so it's nothing I don't mind saying again, is that, you know, I'm part of a generation that maybe even shares something with the millennials and zillennials. I'm not trying to get a seat at the table anymore.
Right.
I want the table, right? And that comes from a very clear place of, you know, it may sound like a certain kind of racial chauvinism, but it's more conditioned by something that Ralph Ellison talks about, the discipline of Blackness. And the discipline of Blackness is recognizing that by virtue of our condition, what we've endured, what we've learned by the experience of Blackness, it's put us in touch with a vision of humanity. So I believe in using astrology and using the connections within astrology as articulating a vision of humanity that white people have lost. And so it is our job not to bring it back to them, but to bring it back for humanity, period. Yeah. Now, if you want to follow along, I'm talking to white people, if you want to follow along, great, but don't get in my way. So it's very much, you know, I you know, considering my own family history, which I won't get too deeply into, but my father was an Aquarian, right? And with a moon in Libra. So I think he cultivated in me a certain understanding of being an outsider. So I've never lost that sense, even though like now it's always surprising to me when people like say like, you know, you're one of the establishment in the astrology world. I'm like, oh, am I really? Wow. Because I don't see myself that way. I always see myself on the outside as a Turk. And I always see myself as a Turk making room for other Turks, you know, whether they're queer, black and queer, you know, all the different ways in which we function on the perimeter, moving toward the center. And like I said, it's not going with this idea like, oh, we just want our little spot there. It's like, no, it's kind of really more a statement about what has happened over the last 500 years and saying like, you had your turn, you fucked up. You're bad at it. Get out the way. That's literally my view. Which is not to say, you know, people might read that and be like, or listen to this, like, you hate white people, Sam? Or you're, you know, nope. You know you're fucking up. So, I mean, like you hear it in the climate change, all these other ways. It's like, well, I don't have to articulate what you already know. Mm-hmm. So I believe like, this is why, you know, I'm, you know, involved in certain endeavors, why I co-founded with Dana the Knuckles, and thanks now to Demetrius Bagley, you know, the International Society for Black Astrologers, why we, you know, the scholarships that we're creating through NORWAC and other things is really making room for us. You know,
I'm just feeling so affirmed right now with everything that everybody is saying. You know, one of my favorite quotes that I personally try to embody says that the only way to live in an unfree world is to be so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. And that is how I try to live my life. Yes, to what Sam just said, I don't have time to try and make, you know, inroads and get people to see my viewpoint and perspective of things. And that's also been a challenge for me growing up, Saturn and Libra, you know, wanting to like be just, be fair, you know, bridge gaps, bridge divides, and feeling inept in the process. And then there's my moon in Aries that doesn't give a fuck. And so for me, it's you asked that question earlier about, you know, sitting in that tension. What I'll refer to, I heard an activist say this tragic gap of nurturing yourself on one hand, and on the other hand being so enraged, as James Baldwin would say, to be Black in America is in fact to feel a sense of rage all the time. And with my Mars in Cancer, Mercury in Cancer, square that Aries moon, that's a tension that I sit with all the time. And I think for me, I've gotten in the habit of recognizing when it comes to my astrology, my astrological makeup, that need to nurture myself into action. And so what Kirah said, as far as the self-care being a form of activism, the need to rest and retreat as being a form of activism, I'm also big, huge proponent of that as well. And it's actually why I'm looking forward to this Cancer energy that's coming, that solar eclipse that's coming, especially having it happen, you know, a couple of days after Juneteenth. You know, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how awful it is for us today and just how awful it was for our ancestors. And I keep thinking and wanting to remember that I have my ancestors. We all have our ancestors supporting us, rooting us on. We are their biggest dreams. And I try to embody that and live that every day. So this Cancer energy that's coming, I'm looking forward to getting rooted, getting connected, coming back home to my roots, to my source, to my ancestors, as I prepare for battle that's always present, but coming up in a big way in the next few weeks.
You know, one of the things that comes up for me as you speak about our ancestry is that I remember hearing someone say that the biggest thing that is broken about not just America, but also the Western world in general, is its lack of a relationship to a working cultural mythos. America and the Western world does not have a relationship to mythology that enlivens it in such a way, whereas it can trace its roots back to something inherently spiritual, or where it can trace its roots back to something that inherently is rooted in the unfolding human evolutionary soul's journey, because it is based on plundering. And when you have plundering and pillaging as the foundation of your understanding of yourself, then you yourself are lost, and that power that you have is only reinforced by you continuing to dominate others, because you do not know who you are outside of dominating others. And as I look at a lot of the police brutality that's going on in America, and I mean, it is shocking. And I posted something on Instagram today, and I think someone said that it was an old story, but this police officer had this Black guy in this hallway who was a pest exterminator, and he had the guy on the floor, and he said, "Cross your legs, and if you uncross your legs, we'll consider that an act of aggression, and we will shoot you." Did anyone else see that video? No? Oh, Lord. And then he said, you know, put your hands up in the air and crawl to me on your knees. And if you put your hands down on the floor, we will shoot you. And the guy, like, he's screaming and he's crying and he's like, please don't shoot. Like, I'll do whatever you want. And he fell down on his hands. And the minute he fell down on his hands, the police let off shots into that young man's body. And it reminded me of this piece that these people, and I don't mean to set up this dichotomy of these people, those people, us people, whomever, but their understanding of themselves is based on a sense of power that is taken and that is stolen and that is usurped, and that is based on making us feel weak. And I see that playing out in terms of the police brutality, and I see that playing out in terms of what occurred with George Floyd, and I continue to see it playing out in terms of the current administration, and how their response to what's going on isn't a response of listening, but it's a response of violence. And so I just want to know from you all, I mean, from the perspective of us having this gift of astrology that has the ability to bridge the gap or bridge the fjord within us of something that is broken and empty within Western civilization, how do you see yourself using your astrology and your access to this information to create a better tomorrow? And not just for yourself, but also for Black people in general. How does your astrology help to heal this wound of lack of spirituality that we're all faced with?
You asked about pain, was the prior question, Mychal. Mm-hmm. That's not new for Black people, right? Definitely not for Black America, right? This is stirring the pot. As I don't know if Kirah said that earlier, or who said it, or maybe several of us said in this conversation. I'm pretty sure I'm familiar with that story you just mentioned in the more current question, Mychal. I don't know if I've seen the video. I feel like I've seen some video stills. I don't watch that stuff. I'll look at some of the photos. Sometimes a clip will sort of slip by me, but it's very uncommon for me to hit play. I think with Eric Gardner was sort of one of the very, very few exceptions in my life where I'm like, I do need to see this. I do need to hear this. And I want to say three things here. One of the first things that I read, and one of my first heroes is Harriet Tubman, and how she, at all costs, and not only her life, but others, she pushed for freedom. She used her ingenuity, her smart strategy skills, etc., right, to free people repeatedly, right, in the context of slavery in the U.S. many moons ago. Two, one of the best things I learned in college is this idea, which for me very much relates to Scorpio when I get to astrology, not that many months later. There's power over, there's power with, and there's power within. Power within in general is not malevolent in this theory. Power with is about influence and community and peer. That for sure can be malevolent and also can be benevolent, and there's a spectrum there. Power over, I think we often understand as malevolent, and for sure we can go to what used to be called 1600 Black Lives Matter Avenue to understand that in real time. But what also happens sometimes, I think in a parent-child relationship, in a more functional or healthy relationship, you have that power over. And there are many examples of that. But we have to understand, and Sam and I have had these conversations offline thus far, what power is and what it isn't, and what kind of power, whoever we are, whatever the situation is. One of the things I love about casting someone's astrology chart, studying it, and then dialoguing with them is really helping them to, I think people know who they are, right? And maybe I'm naive in that, maybe I'm overly optimistic, but for most of my life, I've noticed people know who they are and who are not, for the most part, particularly if we're talking about spirituality and what motivates them. We don't always know that we're in the box, we're in the barrel, or what size the box is, or what shape, or what color, or and. Astrology often, depending on the astrologer, based on a couple points earlier in this conversation, is a way for us to, as Sam's brand says, unlock that, to access that, to give people space, right? We can, to a certain extent, as astrologers, I don't know if we can get in their minds per se, but we get in their space and we understand them. Even if we just met them 5 minutes ago, you know, they sent the data the day before, or a week before, whatever. That's very incredible, because a lot of what I see and have experienced, even being the native, right, the one getting the astrology consultation, is, I wasn't able to articulate that in any sort of, quote, English, right? I haven't really had this conversation with someone else because I wasn't able to put it into words. Astrology helps put a lot into words and or into a frame or focus or clarity and, into a dialogue that's outside the vacuum of my head, their head, who's ever had, again, coming from the native's perspective, not the astrologers. That's pretty incredible. Back to your point about I wouldn't call it the emptiness of the Western world. I would say the shallowness. There's not enough substance there. one of the things that's fascinating, and I'd love a book on it, hint Sam, is when astrology is kicked out of academia, of the academy, or leaves, or however we want to tell that story, and it needs to be told, it becomes this, proverbial stepchild. But I think what it takes out into the wilderness, out of the academy, out of the Western thought, is spirituality / God / the cosmos in a non-sort of physics way. And I think if I understand correctly, the hard sciences, particularly physics, is coming back around to that now. So I don't think it's empty. I think it has a very thin it's substance. The third point is this, which riffs off the second. We are leaving this era, astrological era of what I've been calling the ending era of Earth, 1800s and 1900s, Jupiter, Saturn, conjunction, grand mutations, grand conjunctions, and. We are going into the new age of air. And I won't do the rant here, because that's a whole rant. Probably I just don't want to take up everybody's time on this roundtable. But the new age of air, which you already see in headlines, mainstream media headlines, not as any sort of astrology, but asking things about age of Aquarius, of technology. Certainly a lot of people have been afraid of the bots, aka robots, in the workplace. Many things to say about that. This is a pretty big leap for everybody. And I think a number of people have sensed it before COVID, in October, November, at least that most of us knew about, before I shut down, all of that. That's all to say, this is a chance for, let's say, humans, lean back into what you said, Sam, a few minutes ago, to, and I think part of what you're just saying, Mychal, to get back to, a quote, pun intended here, a richer humanity, something that's more substantive. I like to talk about nature, capital N, and have, before I started studying astrology. Yes, that is missing from a lot of Western, I don't even say thought, that even sort of reveals sort of the problem there or the challenge. I think we can come back around to that. I think that's what I see from Gen Y, aka millennials, and this enormous, steep, sudden climb into astrology, into witchcraft, which necessarily deals with tangible things, which the Western mind doesn't always. It deals with nature. It deals with the four compass directions, astrology, the moon, let me say, which bridges over astrology, and. It's there, but God, it's so shallow, Think about how yoga is this big thing, not just in the last 5 or 10 years or 15 or 20, but go back to the Beatles. When it comes over, it's been here. And when it comes over, to America, to the US, it's coming with all sorts of things, with music, it's coming with gay rights, it's coming with women's lib, sexual revolution, and. And we can certainly throw the astrology into that with Uranus and Pluto. Let me pause there, because I hear I'm trying to get on a rant, not trying to. I don't think it's empty, Mychal. I think it's been about greed and money and wealth, and we have seen extremes of that many times in the last 200 years, not the least of which is through the U.S. Civil War. But I think there's a lot of ways with that U.S. Pluto return, this another astrological cycle specific to the U.S. These things are coming around, or as I've been saying, a shout out to my Astro gal pal, sister Lori, for 10 years since Pluto came into Capricorn. The chickens are coming home to roost. You'll have to tell me, Sam, who of the Black scholars said that. They're coming home to roost, and it's white people now, white Americans. Whites around the world calling that out, because Black people been known that. Let me pause there.
Yeah, Malcolm said that. I mean, I'll make my point quick because I want to hear the sisters, and then I'll say it this way. In terms of how you were talking about it, and, I'm forgetting the initial framing of it, but my initial reaction to dovetail what Demetrius has said, it's kind of like how I got into astrology in the first place. Not just the skepticism, people may know that story, but I got into astrology through heartbreak. And when I say heartbreak, not from any particular woman or person, as much as I was pursuing my master's and PhD in African American studies. And my mentor essentially stabbed me in the back because I was naive. I thought it was about discussing ideas, and it was more about ego, and that I wasn't towing the line and being Afrocentric enough. And one of the things I came to realize as I was unpacking Afrocentrism and other aspects of Black nationalism was realizing that we hide, talking about us as Black people, so much of our pain in the idea of the collective and things related to the collective. Like you can change your name, you can become, Brother Akhenaten, but you're not dealing with your pain. And astrology gave me a tool by which to engage yourself as an individual rather than your association with the collective, rather than your association just as conditioned by Blackness. And going back to Demetrius's point, that is some aspect of the Western mind, is it's, you could say greed, but it's aggregating mentality that kind of has to go with this categorization in order to define itself. The truth I've always said in studying our history, which means leads to studying their history, is that they didn't know who they were, and so they had to make up some shit. And by virtue of making up who they were, they came to define everybody else, which, becomes anti.
Yeah.
So really, whiteness is just an affirmation of an ideal predicated on negating other people, both in terms of their actual definition and even by their resources, everything. Wow. So whiteness this is why I also, you guys on Twitter know this, but that's why I don't call it supremacy. I'm like, I'm going to center you in human history as just imperial. You are just another empire, like every other empire that's ever existed. Mm-hmm. You're not special. You tried to make yourselves as the exceptions of history, and you've shown nothing but the fact that you're situated completely in history. So, that's kind of my take on it. What directed me to get more to the personal, to deal with our pain. 85% of my clientele is Black. So it's really focused on what's going on with you rather than like the meta narrative that, we're directed toward.
Something I wanted to mention, and I forgot to mention it earlier, was that as I was looking into all of you who would be on the podcast today, I went on Mecca's Instagram page and I saw that you do work with a company called Cocoa Butter. And what I saw there was you speaking about the different signs of the zodiac, and you were talking about Capricorn, and then you were talking about Pisces, and you were saying, and some famous Capricorns who you may know are this person, this person, this person, this person. And I was like, where are the white people? Like it was so nice. Like it was so nice. And nice is a tiny word, and it might seem trite, and it might seem as if it's like a superficial word, but it was just so nice to be sitting down, listening to you talk about the different signs of the zodiac, and to call off Black person, Black person, Black person, Black person. And then you did that for Pisces, and you did that for something else. And I was like, oh my God, this is such a good feeling to be in astrological space that fundamentally is willing to acknowledge my Blackness and fundamentally dedicated to making me feel good about that by mentioning other famous Black people within the context of astrology. Because I think that within astrology, what we have to also acknowledge is that astrology has to a large degree become dominated by a concept of whiteness. Now, UAC 2018 was my first astrological conference. Up until then, I was in the Bahamas, traveling around the Caribbean, spreading the good news about astrology and all that stuff. But my first time actually interacting with the larger international astrology community was at UAC. And I remember looking through the UAC brochure, the different people who would be speaking. Wow. And then I specifically remember looking for the Black speakers who were speaking at UAC. And what I noticed what I feel as if I noticed from the outside was that there were the white people talking about zodiacal releasing. There were the white people talking about solar arc directions. There were the white people talking about the eclipses, about Persian astrology, about Guido Bonatti, about William Lilly. There were the white people talking about the heavy-hitting astrological topics, but the Black people were talking about marketing your astrological business, or astropreneurship, or let me show you how to like make money doing astrology. And I was like, why can someone who looks like me also be presenting on Hellenistic astrology? Why can't someone who looks like me be one of these people who are coming out with translation work? Like, why have I somehow been relegated to this very particular part of astrology that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the meat and potatoes of astrology? Now, that's just me looking at it from the outside, and I want to know from you, as people who've spoken at conferences, as people who have been in the larger astrology scene far longer than I have, how has the astrological community, particularly in America, but elsewhere as well, held spaces for you to really speak on astrology? Or have you felt as if there has been some form of gatekeeping towards the sort of spaces where you could be seen, or the sort of environments where your voice could be heard?
I feel like for me, being, I would say like newer to the community at large, maybe over the past 5 years or so, but especially over the past 2 years, I don't know how comfortable I would have felt dedicating so much energy into this community if it wasn't for 3 people on this call, Mecca, Demetrius, and Sam, having already done a lot of the work just to allow me to know that like we're here, and that it wouldn't have to be I guess as hard to break in some way. Just knowing that there were Black astrologers, period, starting out, was huge. And then Sam especially, like I'm someone that was, I would say a great chunk of my education has come from the astrology podcast. And in terms of like my techniques and things that I've learned that I use in my practice on a regular basis. And I've been listening and supporting that podcast for the past 5 years. And having seen Sam on there so early on was just so inspiring for me. It was like everything I needed, because the community is glaringly white. And but then I see the other side exactly. But then I see the other side of it, and I see the younger, like my friends in the community, and just like the local community in New York too. Like, thankfully, because of the internet, we've been able to connect with so many people, and I see like that it's not even that we're coming, we're here. And I think we'll start to see a lot more of our faces in more mainstream places and mainstream like avenues within the community over time. And I don't think it's going to take, hopefully it won't take as long as it might feel, but I think that it's like Sam was saying, like I'm taking the table, like I'm not waiting for one other extra spot and like hoping, how many Black people did they accept to this conference to speak? Who knows? It's we have to, there's not enough. What am I saying? Basically that there's a lot of us and that's what I've realized, especially at NORWAC last year. Like I was really blown away by how many, I mean, not to say that there was maybe enough, but there was a lot of us there, and I just feel like we're not going to wait anymore. We're here.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Kirah just said. Like, for me, when I first started out, I didn't even really know, like, astrology wasn't my career path at first. Like, it wasn't, like, it was a hobby first, and then it became something more. And when I first started out, there was even fewer Black astrologers, like 10 years ago. And it just so happened that I went onto Twitter, and I swear to you, this is exactly what happened. I went onto Twitter, I searched Sagittarius because I'm a Sag, and I found Jason Fleming, Jason, who goes by Sagittarian Mind, and friended him. And then I ended up friending Sam after that because Jason and Sam have a friendship. And once I started to see that there were other Black people who were professional astrologers who were studying this thing, I was just really excited and really encouraged, and like that was definitely like one of the things that kind of like pushed me over the hump to actually take astrology seriously. I did have some white astrologers, Rebecca Gordon and like the Astro Twins, who have like kind of like welcomed me in like providing like opportunities and things like that. But I would definitely say that Sam, even Demetrius, both of them have been very integral in terms of like helping to open doors, for other Black astrologers. And, I attended my first NORWAC conference as one of the scholarship recipients back in 2017. And that definitely helped to like pave a way for me in terms of like, writing a book and, do all the things that I've been able to accomplish, in just like the short amount of time that I've been able to do it. And so when I think about that, I'm really excited to see like how far we can go. I've definitely had my experiences, in terms of like micro and overt aggressions from other white astrologers who, in certain instances who have like tried to like poo-poo my work and who've tried to like poo-poo me. And, I think some of that definitely is an ego thing because I've definitely seen like how like the astrology community or even like the New Age community, there can be a lot of ego involved, we're and that in itself is weird. But I don't know. I think what's interesting is that what fuels my work, I have Taurus on my midheaven, and having Venus rule my midheaven, a lot of the work that I do, like definitely a lot of my clients, all come from like very marginalized communities, whether they're Black, whether they're queer, whether they're, Latino, disabled. I do have like white clients too from time to time. But what I notice is that a lot of the conversations that I have with them always revolve around self-worth and valuing themselves, despite, because I know what it's like to feel othered and like be in this consistent place where you're like the other, and the signature of the other, it runs very strong through my chart. So I've always felt like an outsider. I've always felt like I didn't quite belong. So I've always had to come from this place of like, well, I'm here. Like we're gonna be I'm gonna be here, and I'm gonna take up this space in the best way that I can. And so when I find myself having consultations with clients or writing things for publication or whatever, even down to my book, all of it has to do with like the self-worth piece and the self-valuation piece, and finding this and finding a space where you can be comfortable with who you are and do it in a way that nobody can.
Yeah, it's Mecca, you and I share a similar experience in that this was not my original career path either. And I found myself on Twitter and immediately met Jason, Sagittarian Mind, and through Jason got connected to you, Sam. And it was actually, Black astrologers who pulled me into this community. I don't feel like I've actually received any support from white astrologers. And the fact that a lot of those big conferences tend to be predominantly white, that's actually what's kept me from going to them at all. I'm very, mindful of putting myself in white spaces. And so I've always felt kind of deterred from going. And it's interesting because I remember when, as I began to build my practice and realized that I was getting more and more white people as clients, and someone of an older generation in my family said that now I'm a success because I had more white clients coming in.
Wow.
And I did not see that coming. And I was just shocked by that very statement. And it was in that moment that I set an intention to show up in my full Blackness, when no matter what client was sitting in front of me. And I feel very empowered giving readings in my own style, using my techniques, because especially when I'm with white clients, it's in that moment I own the space. And so, that's something that I'm mindful of with my white clients. And then when I'm with my clients of color, very intentional at centering them and letting it be an experience that reminds them of their own inherent power and their own inherent worth. And it's similar to what Mecca said, there is this common theme of low self-worth. And so I try to be very intentional of just, being that person to remind, oh, you're already this powerful, deserving, valued person that matters. So that's something that I try to incorporate into all of my sessions.
I want to jump in here and say a few things without ranting this time. One of the things I see, regardless of if the person is Black or queer or not, being both of those myself, is, and maybe it's my Sagittarian descendant, I don't know, is it feels like people are carrying around a story or stories of something I see on the chart, right? A planetary placement, not even using an aspect, but a planetary placement in a particular sign, right? Maybe the house, maybe not. And that needs to be encouraged and affirmed. And my suspicion is, and I haven't dug deep into it because I'm not really a consulting astrologer in the way that all or most, at least most of you on this roundtable are. My call is to produce astrology media and events. And I'll come back to that maybe or maybe not in this conversation. Mm-hmm. But I find myself is not even getting to the astrologies and too much with most clients, but really just affirming, yes, you do this. That's yours, right? I often use the example of trying to explain it, outside of a consultation. Mars in Pisces was something that was really bashed so far as a placement when I first started studying astrology way back in the 90s and learned astrology chart casting by hand. And part of my worldview before that, and maybe more so by way of astrology, is it's all good, parentheses, it's all bad. Understand what that is and how you're using your Mars and Pisces or whatever placement or aspect you have. And for sure, there are days where it's feels bad, is shitty, whatever. There are also ways that it can be good, right? Back to power with, if not power within. So, and I could go, I'm sure we all have stories of, I read this aspect is bad or this planetary placement and. I reclaim that because I didn't want to tell someone, oh, we've got Mars and Pisces, that's crappy. Astrology or not, that to me is just not the way you advise someone. That's not how I was brought up. And so I've learned to sort of unpack what the spectrum may look like. Maybe with respect just to the placement, I try to do it for the chart. So I'm really excited by what you're saying, Tracey. I want to connect that to jumping here a little bit different than what I thought I was going to say. One of the most important experiences I've had, and I've been to many astrology conferences. I think the count is somewhere about 30, but a good dozen of those were here in New York City, right? They're local conferences through the NCGR New York City chapter, and even worked at a bunch of those, most of those as a volunteer. Somewhat different conversation. I lost that thought. In 2013, I went to San Fran to the first ever, as far as we know, queer astrology conference. And I may be in tears now. I definitely was in tears. It was 2 days, basically Saturday, Sunday in July 2013. I realized listening to, I think it was Jessica Lanyadu and Barry Pearlman doing sort of a fireside chat, one of the 2 or 3 presentations I did together that weekend. I had not gone for an astrology reading or accepted some free readings from major name astrologers because I didn't want them to lay their shit on me, right? Not necessarily as a Black person, although, right, that's always sort of a thing, astrology or not in this country, but also as a queer person. And not that they were, per se, homophobic or even heterosexist or whatever, but they just didn't have the language to sort of unpack, right, with pronouns or just skipping pronouns altogether and just the person, right, your lover or, right. And I know it's delicate. I know the world has changed and it's changing again. But I had a reading from an astrologer I really adore and who's an amazing person, who is white, who is a boomer and actually a female. And it was so messy that I had to tune out most of the session. I don't think we recorded it by coincidence, which is probably good for me. But I hadn't had a reading in 7 years, other than looking at my own, because of the pain. And just hearing Jessica and Barry and people in the audience and other talks through the weekend say, something 1 or 2 of you said earlier in this conversation we're having right now, about give people space to unpack and sort through themselves and try not to bring I think we're all biased. That's, I think it's always subjective, but not to, as I just said, put your shit on them. Related to that, and even having this conversation, thank you again, Mychal, we can do our own things, right? And we can take those tables, Sam. We have the technologies now. Zoom is amazing. We can do these things, right? And it's not that we didn't know that, but I think we have to, as people just on the planet right now, as people of, from Western countries, and the list goes on, let's have more conversations. Let's have more, I emailed you and here, as I have done, at least for 1 or 2 of you before, hey, this conference is coming up, you may want to apply. I think, no to your earlier question, Mychal. It's not about gatekeeping, certainly not consciously. It's more, and I think this is across the board, this is way beyond astrology. I think this is where racism, right? I don't even know if that's the big enough bucket for it. I was talking to my best friend who's an Aquarian and who's Black and is a woman, and and many other identities. And she's Gen X, right? I don't think we always know the landscape or the game, as they call it, that we have to, I don't want to use that verb, that we have to participate in to apply, right? You have to have the membership to know the conference is coming for most of these conferences to apply. Mm-hmm. Then you have to apply and say the thing. Then in recent years, you go up on a SurveyMonkey poll to get voted in. And what happens is if your name is not known, right? Doesn't matter if you're male, female, white or Black, quote unquote, you're not going to be that top 10 or top 20 because it really is a popularity contest. And sometimes that popularity contest, this is me, and I've controlled these surveys. Let's be really clear. I have controlled these surveys sometimes. I cannot, go beyond some of the things in the world, but I've touched them. I have the data. I have hands on, right? So I'm not just talking out my ass here. And I've purposely had a number of those roles to see, how does this work? How do we shift it, right? I was just trying to get a few seats at the table. And then Brother Sam's now was like, nah, let's just take the table. So I'm wrapping my head around that, right? We have the whole table right here with this round table. So no, it's not gatekeeping. It's sometimes we're dealing with so much other shit, right? Racism, right? The world, etc., that we're like, oh, I have to do more and play more hurdles and games. Yes, is the answer to that question. But sometimes, and that's not just astrology, right? Let's keep it clear. We opt out. And even if we opt in, let's go back to what Tracey just said to us a few minutes ago. Okay, yeah, I applied, or at least I just registered. I'm just going to attend. Are my peeps here? Am I comfortable here? This is easily $1,000 in to pay for 3 or 4 nights on a hotel, pay for airfare, pay for registration. Yeah, I'm going to get all this knowledge, but I'm not going to be comfortable 3 or 4 days out of my house. Oh, sorry, there's food too, right? You got to go get some sort of food, or sometimes I get the green protein shakes or whatever, have those in the fridge, partially to keep money down, but also because you do get to chat with astrologers. Shout out to Sagittarian Mind Jason. I know Jason, right, Black Astrologer, haven't seen in 11 years, almost 11 years. But we met at an astrology conference in Chicago land, ISAR 2009, right? I have pictures of him, amazing energy, gazillion Sagittarian planets, yada, yada. But one of the things that's been amazing to see, and even here in this conversation, is how he has influenced three or four of us, maybe more, and how that all ripples out. That's not new. That's not new for Black people. I would argue it's not even new for people. But now I think, I don't know if you said it, Kirah, or someone else did, we're being more deliberate, right, to have this conversation. Let me go back even before Tracey into Mecca. I want to definitely have this on recording. I think Sam has put this on recording on some other podcasts. Mecca made history in 2018. That has not gotten recognition from the community, right? And when I say astro community, I often mean the astro orgs community, because there are other communities well beyond the orgs, and the orgs are not everything. But there's rationale for them. I'll let Sam go through that. Mecca was the first Black woman, if not woman of color in the world, to publish a book in just over 10 years, right, to her predecessor. And Mecca is part of a wave of astrology books. There are almost 6 dozen, including her 12 zodiac coloring books, that have come out in not even the last 2 years. That's huge. If you look at the list, thank goodness, it's predominantly women writing. But that context and that's something I know directly for myself, right, as Sam can testify to, because no one was tracking that. And so I started asking questions like, well, I have Google. Who else is putting out books? Jessica Lanyadu, probably people know Chaney Nicholas's name, right? Probably the newest, largest on the list, and whole conversation about publishing that we emailed about leading up to this roundtable. But that's huge, right? How do we support Mecca to have another book, which is usually, I think the book says first. How do we get, sorry, gonna hit you again here, Sam. I've been waiting for Sam's book. You can go back and find the tweets, whoever you are listening. I'm gonna leave Kirah alone for a year or two, but I'm gonna be on you too. And I am thinking, and have been thinking about what would I publish. I'll leave you alone too today, Mychal. And that's not just to have astrology books by Black astrologers, right? That's certainly part of it. There are so many books that we need from Gen Xers, Gen Ys, and Gen Z language that use, not archaic English, as I was talking about earlier today, from the 50s or the 60s or 70s. Nothing wrong with that. But sorry, some of this just doesn't read like English in the 2020s, right? It's a different world. I love Linda Goodman's Love Signs. Love it. But I don't know some of the cultural references, a lot of them, that she's making, and I just don't know them. So I'm just repeating these purposely. Shout out to Jason for doing his own thing very purposely and finding his own support system whoever, and whatever that all is. And some of that I know is in person for him as a Black astrologer, as an astrologer. And major props to Mecca for writing a book, which is one of the hardest things I have learned professionally within astrology and my other world, vegan, to do, right? It's a few writing marathon, or a writing marathon or two, and some editing marathons, and then the business of it, and.
Mm-hmm.
We can support and have more conversations like we're having now. We can have more books, heavier lift by making inroads with those people who have publishing contacts, and. Some of that is asking. Listen, the white people in these orgs, and the board that Sam is still on, they're not gatekeeping in a conscious way. They're not trying to keep us out consciously, for the most part. Maybe a couple names that we might be able to call Sam that are. But what they're also not doing, and this isn't just Black, right? It's for queer, it's for other people of color, it's arguably even, God help us, for women, is we're not welcoming, we're not encouraging, we're not harvesting these new generations, these new, so to speak, crops, these new waves of people. And so what happens when someone's not invited to a party they want to go to that happens every month, year, week, or whatever? They let it go. Or, right, most of us do, right? You know, quote unquote, we give up, quote unquote. Or we do like Jason. Oh, this isn't going to feed me. This isn't my tribe. This isn't my space. I'm going to figure out and get what I need because I'm going to do this damn astrology thing. And I'm going to have the tens of thousands of Twitter followers. I'm going to have this. I'm going to have the clients. And nope, I don't want your summit invitation. Nope, I don't want your conference invitation. I'm good over here. And please, you be good over there. No, I'm not looking for you. Right. And that's working for him. That's for sure not my lane, for better and for worse. Mm-hmm. So no, it's not gatekeeping. I'm saying this purposely, intentionally for the third, now fourth time. It's not gatekeeping. And this is really beyond astrology, right? If you listen to some other fields and people, but they're not also welcoming and or hadn't been embracing us. And so we do have to do extra work or different work or both. And I'm sorry to say, again, Gen X here, that's not new. That's how Gen X, we were told that very, very young. And it sucks, but it's the reality that we have been and arguably still are living in. I'm hoping in 10, 15, 20 years that we will have more seats at the table. We'll have more tables. We'll have more of our own, Black owned this, Black owned that, whether solo, collaboratively, whatever. But some of this, folks, and I am talking to you millennials, this is not new. The difference is, I don't know what your parents told you, but for Xers, we were told very young, I'm so sorry, boo, but this is the landscape. And so that's what we have pursued.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that, Demetrius. And I think that you reflected back to us a lot of what we've said this evening, but also a lot of what we feel deep down inside. Now, Sam, something I want to ask you, because this keeps on being drawn back to you, as you have been the, I don't know if you want to take up this role, but you have been the figurehead of sorts for...
I'm the godfather.
Okay, let's just go for the jugular. You're the godfather. for a lot of us who have come into astrology, seeing you in astrology already, you've created a space for us to feel as if we are here. So I think that the question that I asked earlier regarding gatekeeping and regarding the sort of places where Black astrologers are allowed to enter probably really specifically applies to you, because you've been in this realm so much longer than all of us, that if there was any of that, it would have been you who would have experienced it. So what do you feel, how do you feel the astrological community as it is, how do you feel it's accommodated you being in this field?
So much. I'm going to answer your question, but I when I said godfather, I'm saying that somewhat tongue in cheek. I mean, Demetrius has been running right with me, because we were both at the same conference in 2009. And also I want to also acknowledge the astrologers who were on the scene, largely male, right? So I do want to mention that as what's significant about the Mecca moment, the Tracey Rogers moment, the Ashleigh J moment, the Kirah moment, because we're seeing more women. Like I didn't see a Black woman speak at a major astrology conference until I didn't see it until NORAC. I think Marie O'Neill has been on the scene speaking, but she wasn't necessarily as present, and I think, Cheryl Hopkins was the first one I saw at NORAC. But we want to acknowledge like James Coleman, who also was very much out there in terms of the astrology community, and people may not even know about James. And there's Basil Farrington, who also is one of the few authors of a book, an astrology book, A New Way to Do Astrology, or A New Way to Learn Astrology. So, I want to acknowledge both of those men as being out there even before really I was established out there. I just don't know if they actually have been as part of the process of shepherding as many Black people through, right? With my conscious intention to do that. So going back to your question, I felt a lot of the things that, we've all kind of said here, but I had a whole different mindset, because I remember going to NCGR, and once I had got level 3, I was like, well, even though I'm just one level shy of level 4, I hope I can speak at different conferences, and I would try, especially in New York. And I basically got the idea, it was like, the picture from them, like, well, not yet, no, blah, 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 not you, whatever. And it wasn't racist. It was just like, we don't really know you, right? So my mindset was like, you know what? I'm going to make you know me. And when I say make you know me, not like I'm going to come to you. It's like, I'm going to create my audience and then make so much noise, you're going to come to me. That was my moon in Leo, kind of like, you will come to me. And they did. They did. They came to me in terms of their organizations because I'm like, you're going to notice me. I'm not going to keep going and knocking on your door like, hey. It's like, no. That's not going to be my strategy. So I think that was one critical thing. And that Twitter was instrumental in that, not just in terms of who got drawn to me, but also people I became drawn to and opened doors for me that accelerated things in terms of my career from 11 years ago. Both in terms of writing for Ebony and all these other people I've kind of met since then. So I think that's one important thing that's been transformative. But I want to speak to something that you also said, Mychal, and then Mecca also touched on this as well, is that, I think in terms of what we speak on at conferences and what happens at conferences, some measure of that, and Demetrius did touch on that in terms of behind the scenes, how that happens, that's definitely true. But also what we choose to speak on, because the person that you're talking about who came up with astropreneurship, they chose that maybe out of like 2 different topics that they also submitted. And one of the reasons why we may not at this particular point be, like translating like Abu Mashar and all that, is because I think in terms of our critical mass, and I think this is something that's true for the Caribbean, I think it's true for Africa, in terms of other parts of the diaspora, we have to reach a certain class dimension, I might even say, where we have, lack of a better word, leisure, to be able to have that level of investiture to get that resource to bet, like I can send my kid to school and they're learning Latin that it allows them, or learning Arabic that allows them to make those kind of translations. We ain't there yet. We haven't, we just at the point, and I talked about this in particular essay on my page, we're in like it's taken 400 years just to create, the seeds that we have right in front of us. There's definitely more of us. But to be able to say, like, we have enough space in this American continuum to be able to study something like astrology without having to worry about, like, oh, you should be an engineer, you should be this, all these other things. So I think there's a critical mass that we have to arrive at, not contingent on white people, just for ourselves. Because we have to also say, like, white women arrived at this space as well. When I say white women arrived at this space, they got into it sooner. But they actually had to get to the level of economic parity where they had enough leisure time to be able to study and do the things that they're doing, right? This is something that we have to acknowledge about this particular sociological economic moment. The other thing I want to say, particularly to Black astrologers listening and to some of the people here, I think it's important to keep studying and, you know, read the books. Like, you're doing a great job, Mychal, in terms, I mean, I was looking at your resume and who you've studied with. This is what, you know, it's great to learn these techniques. But the one thing I will say to you, having come from where you come from, which I'm just going to say is like the outback. I mean, I don't know where in the Bahamas you're exactly from, but, you know, all of us in some permutation have come from the outback, you know, by virtue of whether our neighborhoods, by the virtue of the otherness that Mecca talked about in terms of Blackness. There's something you're going to bring that, I'm just going to put it this way, another white boy, girl can't bring to the astrology, right? And why I'm saying it this way is that, speaking to something that Mecca talked about, I think you were talking about Black people and low self-worth, but white people have it to profound levels as well. And where it plays out for them is intellectually. And what I mean by that, it's like, what do you mean? You know, like, I've studied there, because they like to play white boy games. And white boy games are like, well, I think Dorotheus has said this. Well, here, I'm looking at Lily, and in terms, they kind of get into the little games where they want to demonstrate, you know, their superiority in relation to the material. I'm like, yeah, okay, motherfucker, you know how to, like, look at these texts and you can read them in Latin, but do you, like, how have you lived it? And how do you help your clients live it? Do you have enough lived experience of being in your body and the experience of these things to be able to talk about it? And so we can get, like, a certain kind of complex and be like, oh, you know, I don't know as much about, like, you know, I haven't read Abu Mashar, I haven't all this. And I think that's important in terms of understanding a tradition to know and do these things. But, you know, one thing that we can't get caught up in is, like, you know, where we get discouraged, because I think a lot of us get turned off. Then there's a other part of our continuum and that we have to talk about. The other part of our continuum is when we swing, is like, we invented everything. We have established, they stole everything from us. You know, it goes down to Egypt, and I don't want to deal with them because, you know, so we start making up shit. And I've gotten into debates, and I'm probably going to draw some fire for this too. It's like, well, you know, you're giving more to them. I'm not giving more to them as much as dealing with the narrative that we can trace, which is not to say that we didn't contribute as African civilizations in terms of Egypt and other things in terms of the making of these things and these moments related to Western astrology. But kind of get into, like, this chest beating and, you know, like, well, why should I learn from that? And, you know, I'm like, well, because for now they have the books. You're just going to kind of go with stuff you're making up, right? Which may or may not be true. And again, I want to emphasize may or may not, because there's some things that we can be creative and make up. So I think there's a lot of different things in terms of making this moment. And, like, you know, Kirah almost brought me to tears. I mean, I didn't show it, but, you know, I was, like, dealing with the tears because, you know, this is what I've been wanting to do, you know, to kind of, like, all right, let's go, and kind of bum rush. I mean, I've used that word even on Chris's show. It's like, no, I'm not here to, like, you know, like, guys, hi, let me in, blah, blah, blah. That's not where I've come from. That's not how I was raised. You know, I'll never forget, and I'll shut up and let more of the sisters talk. I'm going to hear from Ashleigh, because Ashleigh's been, like, mad quiet. You know, when I was younger, when I was in 3rd grade, it was Negro History Week. And it was still Negro History Week. Wasn't even Black History Month, right? And I'll never forget my 3rd grade teacher kind of calling me over, because I was in a predominantly white neighborhood, even though there was a growing number of Black folks there, predominantly white classes. So I went to school with white folk. And my white teacher, 3rd grade teacher, called me over to her desk and said, do you know what week this is? Now, it's Negro History Week, and she had a little certificate, and this is for you, and this is about your history and blah, blah, blah. And I don't know, I mean, maybe I was precocious, but I remember looking at that certificate, and I was like, this is only a week? Wow, I'm gonna make more history than that, right? You know, Moon and Leo issues. You know, I was just like, you know, well, if that's it, we're gonna do more than that.
Uh-huh.
Right? And I know now, having studied more Black history, I know I'm very appreciative for Carter G. Woodson and that week that became a month and all these other things. So I'm not, shaming that at all. But I think that's more the mentality that I see, and especially what I love about millennials, because I know people from Gen X and baby boomers especially give a lot of shit to Gen X. To baby boom millennials? What millennials really have figured out that I love is that they have crashed and destroyed and burned, for the most part, respectability politics. So they're not trying to let's try to, be respectable, and they'll see our virtue. We don't care about anyone's estimation of our virtue, or whether you think, are we smart enough, or do we need do we have a poisonous culture, all these other things. It's more so like, this is what needs to happen, and it's a certain conviction. Some might say it's an arrogance, but I think it is a conviction. So that's my little sermon in terms of going up. I don't know if I answered your question sufficiently.
You completely answered my question, and you put a couple points on blast, and I'm going to get to it, but I just want to check in with Ashleigh and see if she...
No, I guess even going back to touching on the conference tip, I went to UAC 2018 as well, and I also volunteered at the registration. So I'm, seeing everybody come in, and, just not that many Black faces at all. Like, my background is in writing, English, and whatnot. So I'm used to kind of that academia conference, I guess, lifestyle that Astrology conference has. And for me, it was just a really interesting place to be, because it was I definitely felt very othered, and it was interesting to feel as othered in my own city, even though I'm used to that as much. I'm kind of used to that brand of racism, but then it's not that I didn't expect it from the astrological community. It's just a little different, and it takes some getting used to. And it's at times very covert, but then also times very overt. And I mean, it's kind of like just any other experience of being Black in America, but or honestly around the world. But I will say that we need to have our own conferences to, break things down the way that we need them, and even just to structure the flow of the conferences in a way that's more conducive to how we just are as a culture. And I just think there's definitely room, and I agree that we do need to. And honestly, part of the reason I volunteered at the conference, because I was doing recon. I was like, okay, well, this is astrology conference, let me find out what they do. I've dealt with event planning and stuff anyway, but just doing it for astrology is a whole different beast. So I was like, okay, let me look at this, let me check that out. Okay, this volunteers here, that they're checking there, because I know that, yes, we're here to be welcomed, but we also need spaces and events that are more accessible for our people across the diaspora. And so us being able to, come together like this and plant those seeds online, so that when we are able to safely congregate together in person, we can continue this work. And actually, just to go back to topics that we choose, that we cover at conferences, to be honest, I will almost say that when it comes to marketing and astrology, I think that Black people actually that's something that we need to hold on to and focus on, because it's not something that's automatically that easy to do, especially marketing to other Black people. Especially in the Black Christian tradition, a lot of, folks have been told, oh, astrology is evil and yada, yada. So there's another level of, I guess, myth washing that we have to do just off top. So I think that's something that's important. But I will say I agree with you on needing to have more Black and Brown Faces talking about zodiacal releasing and those techniques and really breaking those things down and making references and doing it in a way that we can all understand and use and also implement. What was the other thing? Oh, and I'll say that I think sometimes Black folks can get scared about sharing their intellectual property with white people, honestly, because they like to steal. I've had clients who, after getting a reading with me, now all of a sudden they're an astrologer.
Yeah.
Girl, I was just reading you last week and now you hanging your shingle, like, for real? So, like, shit like that, it's like, you know, you get scared to really get out there and share your knowledge and share your gift and really help people, because it's like, well, damn, you know, like, how am I supposed to feel like I can really do this work if it's, you know, if it's not safe, essentially?
Right,
So,
we become the gateway. You know, we're not, instead of worrying
right.
about being gatekeepers, we become the gateway for them.
And it's one thing to, like, create new astrologers, and it, like, I definitely want to make sure that there are more astrologers out there, you know, of course, but it's hard to trust your knowledge with folks that essentially want to capitalize on it and not cut you in fairly. And I'm not saying that all white astrologers are like that or anything, but that's just across the board in any profession that deals with, you know, the sharing of ideas and the sharing of concepts and things that will kind of ripple through society. So, I mean, I just feel like we, as a people, our creativity and our intellectual property has been used by many people for so long. And I think it's important for us to use astrology as a tool to not only educate ourselves, but also just start documenting and charting our creative growth and our just documenting what we've done over history, just like we've done with white people's history. If we can really start, okay, these trends correspond to these parts of Black history, you know, just across the diaspora, I really think and maybe that's something we can start to work on together at these conferences. You know, we're all together, this collective, you know, diaspora knowledge, and just say, okay, here's what was going on at this time in this country and that, you know, just making it so that we can build that community. And I know I'm like rambling way on, but it's the way of the Aquarius. I just really think it's key for us to also realize, like, what kind of astrologer do you want to be? Like, not all of the astrologers are the type who want to go to conferences or who would learn best at conferences. So I think perhaps, you know, figuring out ways to do that outreach that don't always require everyone to get on a plane and get together. Just being able to set astrologers up in different places with resources to really connect and grow locally, I think is one thing for us to kind of look into. And just doing more things like this and connecting with, you know, each other. So, but that's kind of where I'm at with it. Just trying to, you know, make sure that we all get paid and we're whole and that people aren't stealing our shit.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for just creating this space. I didn't realize how much I needed it until we started getting into it. So thank you so much, Demetrius, Mecca, Ashleigh, Kirah, Sam, Mychal. It's so nice to meet you, and I look forward to connecting again very
Tracy.
soon.
Thanks, Tracy. Bye.
Bye. Have a good night.
Mychal, can I jump in here for an actual brief comment?
Yeah, you can. Go for it.
One of the things I didn't say, and I'm going to out some works here, riffing off of where Ashleigh sort of ended her few comments there, are one of the dirty secrets right now of the Astro.org conferences is almost any speaker is paying into the conference, right? Which is very different than other fields, most other fields and industries. Right. So if people remember, I said it's about $1,000, right, or more to go to a conference for most people. That's not volunteering. That's not speaking. You're just showing up. you're a speaker, you cut some of that cost down. But you don't get, basic travel expenses, food, hotel. You get the registration. You probably get a stipend, my language. It has other names and permutations. So I just want to be clear about that, and you will hear me speak more about this in 2020 and beyond. #Tyrannus. If the paradigm is set up for everybody, Ashleigh, not just Black folks, not just women, all of us, where major name astrologers, been at this 30, 40, 50 years, are not getting a break even for sure coming in to come to a UAC 2018 in Chicago, this conference or that conference. This paradigm for sure, right, we can look at COVID, is not going to ripple down well for Black folks. I'll leave that there, but I have a lot more to say about that in the coming weeks and months.
Mm-hmm. Thank you guys so much for standing in the space that you stand in, and also for sharing your thoughts and opinions. And Ashleigh, I'm completely with you that I'm all about Black people getting paid, and sue me, because I'm rooting for everybody that's Black, and I'm all about us being seen and us being heard. And going back to something that Sam said, as we bring this to an end, I have gone out to try to get the information from the people who I got that information from, because I felt it was important for a Black Bahamian Jamaican boy from the Caribbean, gay, with piercings and dreadlocks, having a voice within the medieval astrology community, the Renaissance astrology community. Like, these are spaces where you don't expect to see people who look like us. I don't know about you all, but right now I'm having a real Wakanda forever moment, because I'm all about I'm all about us getting our coin, but also a part of that coin representing earth representing stability representing recognition, and recognition representing us having an established presence within the world. I'm all about us really having a rooted, established presence in the world, where we don't just support the wider astrological community, but we support and hold space for other astrologers who look like us to feel as if they're welcome here. And, I'm rooting for every Black astrologer who's in their bedroom studying astrology, thinking that no one hasn't seen them, thinking that they're not acknowledged. And I just wait for the day that there's an uprising of Black astrologers to reach this point of critical mass that Sam spoke about. Because, what would that look like? What would that look like if we were showing up at UACs as a tribe of Black people, Black, educated, sophisticated astrologers showing up at UAC and saying, hey, we are here because we deserve to be here, and because we've done our due diligence, we've studied everything, we can stand with anyone here and have a conversation. And I'm, maybe that's too hopeful or something, but
no, it's already happening to some degree. I mean, there's more that needs to happen, but this actually did happen at NORWAC 2016, just before Mecca and Janelle came. That's the one Chartreuse showed up with, and Daisy, Latifa, October. There's a cadre of folks who came to that conference as if and they came selling stuff. Like, Chartreuse came with books and crystals, and one other sister, she showed up with nuts and different things that she had made. It was like, wow. And the other thing I want to say about that was this brother who was my roommate in 2015 for the first scholarship. He actually came back in 2016, got a room at the conference, and then was able to host other brothers and sisters in his space. When I say host them, he didn't necessarily put them all up, but we could all congregate there and talk. Mm-hmm. And so this is Zion Gray. So I just want to give props out to Zion Gray. The other thing I want to say, and I'm sorry,
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to wrap up. Yeah. One key thing I do want to say that's very important, especially for everyone here, I'm also saying it to myself, and I'm also going to talk about that book piece in a second. The key thing, and I want to evoke Chris Brennan here, and not just because of Astrology podcast, but now, Chris and I talk pretty frequently. We've talked over the years. a lot of back channeling. And one thing I want to say that's important for us, going back from our roots in Black nationalism for a second, is institution building. And why I'm talking about Chris, like, what's that got to do with him? Chris has built an institution for himself, and we can't get around that fact. And it's very powerful because he brought more people to UAC than most or many astrological organizations. So we tend to think like, oh, I'm getting out there, blah, blah, blah. But and I got like 25,000 people there on Twitter. I got this on Instagram. But how many do you have in your actual database, in your actual email list? How does that translate into real leverage, not just in terms of economy, but also in terms of things that you can do, so that we're not just reliant on astro orgs, right? So I think that's really something to really take home with us, because it's not just about like bogarting those spaces, but constructing spaces of our own individually and collectively, because that's leverage.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key thing I wanted to say.
Thank you all. Thank you, Sam, for being here, and thank you for holding this space for so many of us from the inception, from before a lot of us have even come into this field. Thank you for being here. Kirah, thank you for your contribution. Thank you for writing your amazing book. Well, first of all, Kirah, tell us where we can find your book. Tell us how we can get our hands on that, because we need some more Kirah magic in our lives.
I like that Kirah magic.
Thank you. Yeah, you can get my book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or probably other places if you Google it. But I wrote a book. It's just called Pisces. It's zodiac signs. It's part of a larger series. And yeah, I wrote all about Pisces. So you can get it there. If you're on my social media, you can just click the link in my bio and it'll take you there.
Awesome sauce. So I'll be putting the link for that down below. Ashleigh, thank you for being here. I mean, you said a lot. You said a little, but you said a lot. and
Story of my life.
And I appreciate you being here to hold this space. And Mychal Woods, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being here. I know that you had a busy day today, but you carved out the time to be here. And you as well are an author. Please tell us about your book, where we can find that, so I can put that in the link down below as well.
Sure. So folks can find my book, Astrology for Happiness and Success, wherever books are sold, Barnes & Nobles, Amazon. I don't know why I want to say Borders, but Books A Million. But you can go to my website, mylifecreated.com, and that's where you'll find, horoscopes, my social media, links to my podcast, Stars on Fire. So that's where you can get everything.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And does anyone else here have a podcast that we definitely need to make a shout out for, or a podcast that you're involved in that you want our listeners to go and check out?
Mecca.
Yeah.
Oh, she has her podcast. Anyone else?
I'm trying to get there. I'll say that.
Okay.
I don't have one yet.
Okay, cool. And Demetrius Bagley, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being the organizer in chief of what happened tonight, because I mean, it's one thing to have a vision, but it's another thing to have people who actually know the emails of everyone, who knows how to put stuff together, and you completely stepped into that role for this to happen this evening. So thank you so much, Demetrius.
You are very, very welcome. Thanks for having us.
Yep.
Most
Thank
definitely.
you, Mychal.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you so much for this.
Awesome.
Much needed.
Well, we'll wait for Ashleigh to come back so we can say a proper goodbye.
Hey, Ashleigh.
Hey, Ashleigh.
Hi, sorry about that. I don't know.
We didn't want to say goodbye.
Like,
we didn't want to be like, all right, deuces, and then like, Ashleigh's like, hey.
All right, everyone. And for our listeners out there, whether you have been with the Oraculos True Divination podcast from the beginning, or if this has been your day one, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for continuously coming here and sharing space with me. I receive your comments, I receive your feedback, and I receive your love. please do, if you've liked what you've seen here, please do subscribe to the podcast, as well as share this with your other astrologically minded peers, whether they're Black, whether they're white. Share this with the people so that the people know that these conversations are happening. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for being here and for sharing Astro Space with us. We love you. We thank you. Be safe, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Look at us. Wow. Okay, this was amazing though.
Thank
was.
you so much. This was awesome. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of it.
Thank you guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for doing this. This was much needed. It's nice to feel connected to the community. So.
All right. So look out for Juneteenth.
All right, Juneteenth.
All right.
It is. All right.
See you guys soon. Have a good
later.
one. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
You look so wonderful. I don't know what the problem was. You look amazing.
It was a different world.